Hello everyone, it's nice to meet you again with the Disney Artist channel. In today's video it will be the character Alberto Scorfano from the movie, Luca. Alberto Scorfano is the deuteragonist of the 2021 Disney Pixar animated feature film Luca. He is a sea monster that lives on Isola del Mare, an Italian island, with no parental guardian. Alberto helps Luca escape to Portorosso and enter the Portorosso Cup so they can buy a Vespa and see the world together. Alberto Scorfano is an independent, free-spirited teenage sea monster with unbridled enthusiasm for the human world. Expressive and gregarious, he is all about having fun. So inviting a fellow sea monster to hang out above the surface is a no-brainer for Alberto. Besides, Luca is the perfect audience for Alberto's vast, albeit questionable, knowledge of all things human. Alberto proudly prizes his knowledge of the human world and, in being alone for so many days in the lighthouse, was instantly eager to share it all with Luca. He rarely takes things seriously and is all about having fun, a trait that stays solid within him throughout the entire film. One of his dreams was to ride a Vespa, a special scooter depicted in a poster he had collected and stored in his home. After meeting Luca, Alberto insisted on taking the lead. Having an opportunity at making a friend gave him the chance to tell the younger sea monster everything he knew about the humans. Despite Luca's dislike of being told what to do, seeing Luca and Giulia bonding over common interests made Alberto distraught as he didn't want to lose Luca, who was his only friend. This was because Alberto's father abandoned him as a child after believing he was old enough to live on his own. After a while, his living situation led him to feel incredibly lonely, to the point where he can become possessive and angry at people, believing they will leave him and will be alone again if he doesn't keep them close. By the end of the movie, however, he is more considerate of Luca and even sells the Vespa he's always dreamed of having to give Luca a ticket to Genoa. He formed a close bond to Massimo, who becomes a surrogate father figure to him, and was willing to stay in Portorosso with him while Luca could be happy in Genova going to school with Giulia. During a fishing trip with two fishermen, talking about the existence of sea monsters, Alberto sneaks up on them and starts taking various objects that they have. Once one of the fishermen spots Alberto, and he tries to escape but catches himself in a net. He eventually manages to escape as the fishermen throw a harpoon at him but misses. When going to get the objects that have sunk from the boat incident, he plays a prank on a young sea monster named Luca Paguro by wearing a diving suit and scaring him. Once proving to be a sea monster like him, Alberto resumes collecting the objects, and soon brings Luca up to the surface. And he gets mesmerized by the surroundings but immediately leaves to his concern. Alberto later meets Luca when he convinces himself to go back to the surface and give him a small lesson on walking before showing him the great offers of the surface and then his hideout. Alberto then introduces the Vespa, explaining that it is a vehicle that can take you anywhere, and Luca suggests that they should make one. They spend a couple of hours on it before Luca returns home. The next day, Alberto gets the Vespa down from the tower by pushing it down and reassembling it, and gets Luca to hold the ramp while he rides it. However, the Vespa ends up breaking in the process, as Alberto and Luca spend the next couple of days rebuilding it. Alberto then convinces Luca to ride it down with him, but he's scared, to which he tells him to say, "Silenzio, Bruno," to cancel the negative thoughts in his head, giving Luca the confidence to ride it down the ramp with him. Later at night, Alberto tells Luca the stars are anchovies that go there to sleep and tells him a bit about the human town. This soon causes Luca to overstay at the island. After Luca tells Alberto that his parents will send him to the deep, Alberto convinces him to hide away in the human town and ask Signor Vespa to build them a Vespa. so they can see the world together. They soon sneak into the town, amazed by their surrounding, but soon get disrupted by a self-absorbed teen named Ercole Visconti when Luca almost damaged his Vespa by kicking a ball. Ercole starts to mock and bully them until a local fish delivery girl named Giulia Marcavaldo comes in and saves them. Giulia tells them that underdogs have to look out for each other, and also explains that she wants to compete in the Portorosso Cup to take down Ercole. Alberto seems uninterested in working with her, but Luca seems interested, and they soon learn that the prize is money, which they can transfer into a cheap Vespa. So with Alberto claiming that they're runaways, Giulia teams up with them and takes them into her home where they have dinner with her father, who is a one-armed fisherman and sea monster hunter, while his cat, Machiavelli, catches them in their true form at one point and grows suspicious of them. With Massimo conflicted on letting Giulia compete in the race due to her past experience and the lack of money they have, Luca and Alberto offer to help him with fishing, to which he agrees as Giulia lets them stay in her treehouse. In the morning, Luca and Alberto accidentally revert to their sea monster forms due to the fact that it was raining last night, where they almost got caught by Giulia and Massimo but managed to get away with it. They then go fishing with Massimo where Alberto learns that he was born with one arm. They manage to get a load of fish in their net, which leads them to go sign up at the booth, where Ercole comes in and takes the money off Giulia. Luca gives Giulia words to insult Ercole, which leads him to buckle and encourage them to enter so that he can beat them. Alberto takes eating pasta, where he has to eat multiple kinds of pasta with a fork, and assists Luca and Giulia on their training. During Giulia's training, Ercole comes in and almost crashes into them intentionally, but leads to Alberto getting splashed with water, where he almost gets caught as a sea monster. While this happens, Massimo soon takes an interest in Alberto and takes him on various fish outings, forming a father-like bond with him. Over time, the trio begin training for the race, with Giulia as the coach. Alberto leaves briefly to help Massimo bring in the nets one night, but his smile turns into a frown. During that time frame, Giulia begins showing Luca things like the solar system via a telescope. Alberto catches them talking and laughing about it. Alberto tells Luca that he's been looking for him and it's time to leave. Luca says he is going. Giulia then gifts one of her books to Luca. As Luca thanks her, Alberto appears at the window again, saying Luca's name in a more demanding tone. Alberto then glares at Giulia in a very cold way. He then leaves frustrated, much to Luca's shock. Alberto says he wants to show Luca something. Luca begins explaining that the fish are actually stars. Alberto coldly disagrees, however. They both stare in awe at the Vespa. As Alberto pulls out his Vespa drawing, only with more things added to it like gelato, pasta and an umbrella. Luca says that they should add a telescope, with Alberto saying that it should be one that shoots lightning. He disagrees and goes on to explain that Giulia has a bigger one at her school, as Alberto just stares at him in annoyance. Luca then proposes that they should visit Giulia at her school and maybe even attend, expressing his interest. Alberto then explains that they're getting a Vespa to live on their own and asks Luca what he thinks will happen when people find out he is a sea monster. Ercole then shows up out of nowhere, commenting that something's fishy about them and that they're hiding something. Alberto steps Luca behind him as he tries to come up with an excuse to leave. Ercole has Ciccio and Guido grab Alberto. Ercole then proceeds to punch Alberto in the stomach, making Alberto wince in pain and cough. Eventually, Alberto breaks Ciccio and Guido's grip and stares at Ercole coldly as he tells both of the boys to leave. They run right back to Giulia's house. In the following day, the training for the race intensifies and Alberto also accompanies Massimo while he fishes. He gets a scare when he sees a sea monster underwater. Massimo harpoons it but realizes that it's just seaweed, making Alberto sigh in relief as Massimo put his wet hand on his shoulder. His shoulder transforms partially, but Alberto quickly swipes the water before Massimo could notice. The next morning, Luca and Alberto are so tired they can't even walk straight. Giulia introduces them to espresso coffee. They both only stick their tongues in the mugs and groan. The coffee jump starts them, with Alberto doing sets using Machiavelli. Later that night at dinner, Alberto has trouble eating pasta with a fork. Massimo shows him how. Alberto tries and succeeds. He tries to show Luca his accomplishment, but sees Luca is busy reading a zoology book with Giulia. Alberto angrily eats his pasta on his fork as jealousy begins to fill him. The next day, as Giulia trains Luca for his part in the race with cycling, they have a brief run-in with his parents. Giulia and Alberto sit on the back of the bike. Luca, to avoid his parents, takes a different path. Giulia asks Alberto why he isn't training. Alberto pulls out pasta from his pocket, shoves it in his mouth, and says he is always training. The trio make it to the top. Giulia notices the train and explains it takes her to Geneva, with Luca asking if it goes to her school, with Alberto scoffing at the question. Alberto then redirects Luca's attention to the race, proclaiming they won't go anywhere if they don't win. Luca is scared, but when Giulia tries to coach him on how to go down the hill, Alberto tells her to stop bossing him around, saying that he knows what he needs since he's his friend. Then Alberto takes charge of the bike, saying that Luca needs him and begins cascading down the hill at a dangerous speed. Luca keeps pleading Alberto to halt the bike, but Alberto refuses, making Luca think that it's Bruno telling him that. The two race down the hill, with Luca trying to grab the bike handles the whole time to regain control, only to be met by Alberto yelling at him to let go. Luca and Alberto scream as their bike speeds down to a cliff, hitting a small metal gate. Luca and Alberto plunge into the ocean. Giulia catches up and begins calling for Alberto and Luca, afraid of what could have happened to them. Meanwhile, underwater, Luca and Alberto are back in their sea monster forms. Luca gives Alberto a glare, with Alberto raising an eyebrow in confusion. When they see Giulia calling for them, the two hide behind two big rocks to avoid being seen by her. Luca then tells Alberto to leave before she sees them. Luca swims away quickly with Alberto following him close behind. Alberto and Luca wash up on shore where Luca becomes mad at Alberto for his recklessness, as he begins explaining that he was showing him how to do it the correct way. Luca says that Alberto doesn't know how to do it the right way and all he did was made them crash into the ocean. Alberto reassures Luca, telling him everything is fine. Luca, panicked, begins explaining that his parents saw him, but Alberto tells Luca that his parents aren't around and that the town was starting to make him crazy. Alberto goes on to tell Luca that they just need the Vespa and they will be out of the town, while putting his hand on Luca's shoulder. Luca slaps his hand away and tells Alberto that it won't be any different. Luca then tells Alberto what he really wants. He wants to go to school like Giulia, shocking Alberto. He resists, but Luca says that he's just too afraid, causing Alberto to shove Luca and the two get into a fight as Giulia approaches them, explaining she's happy they're safe and hugs them both. However, Alberto and Luca break off and avoids look at each other. Giulia notices something is wrong, so she playfully scratches Alberto's head, which results in him growling at her. Giulia goes to Luca to ask what is going on. Alberto lies, saying that nothing was wrong and demands that they continue training. Luca contradicts Alberto, saying that they do have something to ask. Luca then goes on and asks Giulia if they can go to school with her. Giulia is delighted as Luca says the greeting Alberto taught him. Alberto, angered and filled to the brim with jealousy, then makes a desperate attempt to keep his friend with him. As casually as he can, Alberto brings up the question if Giulia's school accepts everyone, even those that aren't human. Luca notices what Alberto is after and says his name lowly, signaling him to stop. Alberto refuses and further asks if some students were sea monsters. Giulia is taken aback for a moment, obviously confused by Alberto's absurdly strange question. Alberto then states that he doubts the school would even accept sea monsters. Alberto says, right? Awaiting Giulia's response. Luca stops Alberto, pretends shrugging it off and tells Alberto that it was a very weird joke. Alberto says that it is very hard to imagine, so he'll just show them. Without any hesitation, Alberto dives into the water. Giulia approaches Alberto as Luca tells her to wait. Alberto is face down in the water. Giulia comes near, telling him to quit goofing around as she grabs his arm. As she does, she notices that Alberto's arm is different, periwinkle and scaled like a fish. Giulia screams and backs up, whimpering, as Alberto rises up from the water, menacingly. Crouched with claws ready to attack, fully transformed into his true sea monster self. Giulia screams for help and pleads for him not to hurt them, going next to Luca for protection. Alberto angrily tells Luca to see, telling him that he knew that this scenario would happen. Luca, unwilling to give himself up, screams "sea monster" while pointing at Alberto. Alberto gasps and says Luca's name, sadly. Giulia then grabs a small branch nearby and points it at Alberto, telling him to stay back. Alberto stumbles backing away from the branch that Giulia pointed at him. Alberto then turns to Luca again and looks at him with a look of betrayal in his eyes. The three turn when they hear Ercole screaming "sea monster" as he, Ciccio, and Guido run towards the shoreline with harpoons. Alberto looks at them but then redirects his look towards Luca. He stares at Luca, his ears drooped and eyes narrowing with sadness, almost ready to cry as he retreats into the water. Alberto eventually turns around and begins going deeper into the water. When Ercole and his boys make it to the shoreline, they throw their harpoons. Luca watches, horrified, as each of the harpoons all miss Alberto. Alberto, however, doesn't even flinch. Alberto then turns around one last time to see Luca. Heartbroken and betrayed, Alberto swims away in tears. Later on, Luca and Giulia return to Giulia's house. Massimo notices that Alberto isn't around, with Luca explaining he left and doesn't want to be looked for. Worried about the boy's safety, Massimo sets out to find Alberto. A bit later, Giulia finds out that Luca is also a sea monster after splashing water on him, this time unafraid as she knows the two mean no harm towards anyone. Giulia has Luca leave for his own safety. After some reluctance, Luca finally agrees and leaves sadly, telling Giulia goodbye and that he is sorry. Ashamed of what he had done, Luca sets out to find Alberto. He swims to the island and walks over to Alberto's hideout. The ladder to the hideout had been tipped over and broken. Luca scales the wall using the protruding bricks. When Luca makes it to the top, he calls for Alberto, as he sees that the place has been trashed, almost every item is destroyed, possibly caused by Alberto in a rage. With the Vespa drawing Alberto drew was found on the floor, ripped in two. Alberto, back in his human form, calls from the top of the tower, asking Luca what he's doing there. Luca apologizes to Alberto, saying he wished he could take it back. Alberto, still hurt by Luca's betrayal, tells Luca coldly that he got the message and to go away and leave him alone. As Alberto walks out of view, Luca notices the Vespa poster is on the ground, and in its place, there are tally marks on the wall, 383 of them. Luca goes up to question his friend about the marks. Alberto is reluctant, curling himself up. After Luca asks again, Alberto explains that he started counting when his dad left, but he never came back. Therefore, he left it, saying that his dad was better off without him, including Luca. Alberto, with tears in his eyes, states that Luca is always the good kid everyone loves and all he does is ruin everything. Luca comforts Alberto, telling him to remember the Silenzio, Bruno, thing he taught him. He also reminds Alberto about their dream of having a Vespa, but Alberto angrily tells him to drop it, adding in that they should have never become friends in the first place. Luca touches Alberto's shoulder, but Alberto slaps his hand away, telling him once again to leave him alone. Luca agrees and reenacts when Alberto showed him gravity by jumping off into the tree. Alberto asks what he's doing, with Luca responding that he was going to fix everything. It is now the day of the race. Luca makes it through the swimming part of the race, using Alberto's diving suit to avoid transforming into his sea monster form in the water. He gets past this without any suspicion and begins the pasta eating segment of the race, the segment Alberto was supposed to do. Luca manages to finish and eats his pasta. Then begins the bike riding segment as he hops on and pedals his bike. Thunder is heard as clouds begin to cover the sky. Soon enough, it begins to rain. Luca is stuck under an awning in the rain. As he looks on, saddened that he nearly made it, Luca hears his name called in the distance. Luca looks up and notices a blue umbrella in the rain coming towards him. The person lifts the umbrella, and it is revealed to be Alberto, running back for Luca. Luca is happy to see his friend. Alberto yells over at Luca that he's coming for him. Ercole comes by and pesters Luca for fearing the rain. Alberto catches his attention, yelling, "Hey!" At Ercole, obviously mad that he was pestering Luca. Alberto is determined to make it to Luca's side, but before he can, Ercole kicks him in the cheek, causing his umbrella to go flying. Alberto, soaked in the rain, transforms back into a sea monster. Ercole immediately stops, screaming, "Sea monster." Alberto looks up at Luca, noticeably afraid as Luca stares back at him in horror. Alberto looks up as people scream in fear and a mother picks up her frightened child. Ercole begins demanding for Siccio to get his harpoon to kill Alberto. Not wanting Luca to come and risk himself getting caught too, when Luca tries to come to help, Alberto tells Luca to stay right where he is and that he's still okay. Alberto then starts screaming happily while flailing his arms around, running towards Ercole, with Luca calling his name. Ercole throws a net over Alberto and he falls hard on the ground. The people gasp. Ercole begins getting a harpoon, readying himself to land the fatal blow and kill Alberto. Luca, angered by what they did to Alberto and seeing his friend helpless, races towards him in the rain, transforming in front of everyone back into his sea monster form. Everyone turns and Alberto lifts the net up his face as Luca gut-wrenchingly reaches for Alberto's hand. Alberto reaches for Luca and the two manage to hold each other. Luca manages to land Alberto on his bike. The two ride through town. As Luca and Alberto come near the other racers, Alberto greets and excuses himself and Luca very casually as if nothing is happening. Ercole catches up to them, harpoon in hand. Alberto notices and lets out a yelp. Ercole throws his harpoon, with Alberto covering Luca's eyes while yelling his name. Because of this, Luca steers the bike out of direction. They accidentally go through someone's house and come out the window. They ride down a stairway, Alberto hitting his shoulder on the railing. Eventually, Ercole is able to surpass them, mocking them that they should have left when he told them to. Ercole then screams that he was going to kill himself some sea monsters while laughing evilly. Julia, who is right behind Ercole, rams her bike into Ercole's, knocking him and her off their bikes, which Luca and Alberto notice. Alberto yells Julia's name as Luca halts the bike. They both run to her, with Julia's dad getting a harpoon to kill the sea monsters. However, as he gets nearer to them, Massimo notices that the sea monsters he was readying to kill were actually Luca and Alberto. Everyone surrounds them with harpoons. Ercole comes out of nowhere saying he saw them first so he gets to kill them. Luca firmly states that he's not afraid of them, with Alberto stiffening up in response. Ercole says that they might not be afraid, but that the people are afraid. Horrified and disgusted by Luca and Alberto because they are monsters. Julia screams to stop and that they are not monsters, with Ercole asking who they are then. Massimo comes out, claiming he knows. He looks at the kids, first at Luca, then at his daughter, and then Alberto, before proclaiming them as Luca and Alberto and the winners of the race. Ercole says that they can't have won, saying that they aren't people. Massimo has Mrs. Marsigliese determine if so or not. The bike that Luca and Alberto abandoned is across the finish line. She proclaims that technically and legally they won. The trio look at each other, happy, as Ercole says that it doesn't matter and they're sea monsters. Fishermen get close with harpoons. However, Massimo comes behind the trio, causing everyone to drop their harpoons. As Ercole stares in disbelief, Luca, Alberto, and Julia grab and destroy his harpoon. Ercole orders for Siccio and Guido to grab him another and do something good for once in their pathetic lives. Fed up with Ercole's abuse, Siccio and Guido throw him and his wool sweater into the fountain. Julia declares the reign of terror over. Luca's parents come out and transform in front of the crowd. Daniela loads on Luca saying that he had them scared, but he did so well in the race, saying that she's so happy but still mad at him for sneaking off. In the end, Daniela cries, relieved that her son is okay. Luca proclaims he loves her and embraces his mother as his father hugs him. Daniela looks at Alberto and Julia. Alberto just shrugs and doltishly smiles. Finally, the underdogs are given their reward, a trophy as winners of the Portorosso Cup. The three begin rejoicing, happy to have won. Meanwhile, they receive applause from the crowd. Many kids begin running up to them, congratulating them. One of the kids, a little girl, gently pulls Alberto's arm. He notices and gets down to her level. The girl then high-fives Alberto's hand, while he smiles happily. Later on, the three have fun on the Vespa, with Alberto messing around with the cat, Machiavelli, making it look like he's driving. Julia asks where they'll go first. Alberto explains that Luca and he will stay to repair it in order for it to take them around the whole Earth. Julia says to them to not forget to pack for it, but then remembers she forgot to pack to go to school, where Luca sadly stated that she'll learn so much. Alberto listens quietly. Julia says that she'll lend Luca some books. Luca excited to hear so. As Luca and Julia leave, Alberto looks down at the Vespa and smiles. He then follows Luca and Julia. It is now time for Julia to leave. Julia states how she's amazed that they actually won the race. Alberto tells her that maybe they can race next summer. Julia then says that maybe they can just have some fun. She hugs the boys. Luca and Alberto hug her goodbye. After a final goodbye, Julia boards the train. Luca then asks Alberto if he's ready to fix the Vespa, but Alberto says that he has sold it while handing Luca a train ticket. Luca's family come and they tell Luca that if he writes to them every day and stays safer than safe, he can go to school. It was revealed that Alberto talked them into it. And according to Luca's grandmother, it wasn't easy to persuade them. Luca happily accepts, telling Alberto to come, but Alberto isn't going. He tells Luca that it was the only ticket he could buy and that Massimo wants him to stay behind and help with fish, probably even move in. Luca is unsure, saying he can't do it without him. Alberto says that he already has been doing it and hands Luca the Vespa drawing they made, taped back together. Alberto tells Luca that whenever he jumps off a cliff or tells Bruno to stop bothering him, that will be him. Luca asks Alberto how he'll know he's okay. Alberto has no answer. Instead, he hugs Luca as tears stream down his face. Alberto comforts Luca, telling him that he got him off the island and he'll be okay. Luca boards the train. Alberto then says the greeting he taught him one last time. Luca asks what it seriously means, and Alberto tells Luca he doesn't know and to find out for him. They both hold hands as the train departs. They eventually let go. Alberto follows the train, running, and as he makes it into the rain, he transforms. Alberto begins screaming and cheering for Luca, waving goodbye with his hat to his best friend. However, as he gets nearer to them, Massimo notices that the sea monsters he was readying to kill were actually Luca and Alberto. Everyone surrounds them with harpoons. Ercole comes out of nowhere saying he saw them first so he gets to kill them. Luca firmly states that he's not afraid of them, with Alberto stiffening up in response. Ercole says that they might not be afraid, but that the people are afraid. Horrified and disgusted by Luca and Alberto because they are monsters. Julia screams to stop and that they are not monsters, with Ercole asking who they are then. Massimo comes out, claiming he knows. He looks at the kids, first at Luca, then at his daughter, and then Alberto, before proclaiming them as Luca and Alberto and the winners of the race. Ercole says that they can't have won, saying that they aren't people. Massimo has Mrs. Marsigliese determine if so or not. The bike that Luca and Alberto abandoned is across the finish line. She proclaims that technically and legally they won. The trio look at each other, happy, as Ercole says that it doesn't matter and they're sea monsters. Fishermen get close with harpoons. However, Massimo comes behind the trio, causing everyone to drop their harpoons. As Ercole stares in disbelief, Luca, Alberto, and Julia grab and destroy his harpoon. Ercole orders for Siccio and Guido to grab him another and do something good for once in their pathetic lives. Fed up with Ercole's abuse, Siccio and Guido throw him and his wool sweater into the fountain. Julia declares the reign of terror over. Luca's parents come out and transform in front of the crowd. Daniela loads on Luca saying that he had them scared, but he did so well in the race, saying that she's so happy but still mad at him for sneaking off. In the end, Daniela cries, relieved that her son is okay. Luca proclaims he loves her and embraces his mother as his father hugs him. Daniela looks at Alberto and Julia. Alberto just shrugs and doltishly smiles. Finally, the underdogs are given their reward, a trophy as winners of the Portorosso Cup. The three begin rejoicing, happy to have won. Meanwhile, they receive applause from the crowd. Many kids begin running up to them, congratulating them. One of the kids, a little girl, gently pulls Alberto's arm. He notices and gets down to her level. The girl then high-fives Alberto's hand, while he smiles happily. Later on, the three have fun on the Vespa, with Alberto messing around with the cat, Machiavelli, making it look like he's driving. Julia asks where they'll go first. Alberto explains that Luca and he will stay to repair it in order for it to take them around the whole earth. Julia says to them to not forget to pack for it, but then remembers she forgot to pack to go to school, where Luca sadly stated that she'll learn so much. Alberto listens quietly. Julia says that she'll lend Luca some books. Luca excited to hear so. As Luca and Julia leave, Alberto looks down at the Vespa and smiles. He then follows Luca and Julia. It is now time for Julia to leave. Julia states how she's amazed that they actually won the race. Alberto tells her that maybe they can race next summer. Julia then says that maybe they can just have some fun. She hugs the boys. Luca and Alberto hug her goodbye. After a final goodbye, Julia boards the train. Luca then asks Alberto if he's ready to fix the Vespa, but Alberto says that he has sold it while handing Luca a train ticket. Luca's family come and they tell Luca that if he writes to them every day and stays safer than safe, he can go to school. It was revealed that Alberto talked them into it. And according to Luca's grandmother, it wasn't easy to persuade them. Luca happily accepts, telling Alberto to come, but Alberto isn't going. He tells Luca that it was the only ticket he could buy and that Massimo wants him to stay behind and help with fish, probably even move in. Luca is unsure, saying he can't do it without him. Alberto says that he already has been doing it and hands Luca the Vespa drawing they made, taped back together. Alberto tells Luca that whenever he jumps off a cliff or tells Bruno to stop bothering him, that will be him. Luca asks Alberto how he'll know he's okay. Alberto has no answer. Instead, he hugs Luca as tears stream down his face. Alberto comforts Luca, telling him that he got him off the island and he'll be okay. Luca boards the train. Alberto then says the greeting he taught him one last time. Luca asks what it seriously means, and Alberto tells Luca he doesn't know and to find out for him. They both hold hands as the train departs. They eventually let go. Alberto follows the train, running, and as he makes it into the rain, he transforms. Alberto begins screaming and cheering for Luca, waving goodbye with his hat to his best friend. Alberto makes a comeback in a short film alongside Massimo. In the short, Alberto is now living with Massimo. Expanding from the ending of Luca when Alberto explained that Massimo wanted him to help with the fishing business and move in with him. Alberto receives a letter from Luca, where Luca expresses his excitement about using the big telescope at Julia's school that day. Alberto begins writing back a letter to Luca, explaining how his life in Portorosso is awesome, describing everything as perfect. A little montage plays as we see Alberto giving the kids of Portorosso rides on the bike wagon, with him driving. Alberto is given a large ice cream cone by an old woman. It tips, but Alberto is able to catch the scoops in his mouth. Some kids nearby, playing kickball in the plaza, kick the ball in Alberto's direction. Alberto jumps into the fountain and, in his sea monster form, hits the ball with his tail. Alberto writes back about how he has become a good employee to Massimo and has been helping him with fish deliveries. Despite his enthusiasms to he working with him, Massimo barely talks to Alberto personally except when he is breaking the rules or to warn him against being in their fishing boat without his supervision. It quickly becomes apparent that Alberto is seeking approval from Massimo, but is concerned about being fired for some of his mistakes. Right after finishing his letter, Alberto is called by Massimo, who's obviously not content with him being in the boat by himself. Alberto apologizes, expressing his knowledge that he's not allowed. Massimo tells Alberto he's late. With Alberto running to the bike, Alberto tries to deliver caught fish efficiently, but keeps tossing them to the wrong people, even breaking someone's vase. Alberto boasts that Julia's got some competition with him around. However, Massimo's customers are complaining to him about their fish deliveries. Massimo shoots Alberto a look. Alberto asking if he's fired. Massimo sighs a bit frustrated, Alberto's face dropping to a bit of a sad expression. Sometime later, Alberto tries to cook lunch for Massimo, claiming he's got it, but makes a mess of the whole kitchen after accidentally exploding a can of tomato sauce. After one of their fishing trips, Massimo begins to converse with a customer. Although told to stay put, Alberto tries to lift a whole barrel of fish, only to be pressured by the weight. Massimo rushes to save him, but ends up falling into the water with the barrel, losing their day's worth of catch. Although a bit put off, Alberto sheepishly gives Massimo his hat. Massimo grabs it rather aggressively, obviously frustrated. Alberto looks down a bit sadly, but it quickly becomes a smile when he gets an idea. To make up for the incident from earlier, Alberto sneaks out that same night to catch more fish. Alberto goes to the boat alone. He puts his things down in it and begins turning on a lantern while humming. Unbeknownst to him, for a fleeting moment, Machiavelli followed him to the boat. Alberto sees Machiavelli's eyes in the dark and screams, getting frightened by him and dropping his lantern. Machiavelli meows at Alberto. With Alberto questioning Machiavelli what he's doing in the boat, Machiavelli meows in response, as if insisting they should go back home. Alberto beings reassuring Machiavelli that Massimo won't mind when he sees just how much fish they catch. Alberto promises that he'll make Massimo proud. Machiavelli meows again, this time in fear. As he notices something behind Alberto's back, Alberto dismisses Machiavelli's meowing. However, Alberto feels heat against his back and hears the crackling sound of fire. Alberto sniffs and turns quickly. Alberto realizes that he accidentally set the boat on fire. The commotion is heard from inside the house. As Machiavelli meows loudly and Alberto's panicked screaming is heard, they escape by Alberto jumping into the water with Machiavelli in his arms. Alberto runs out of the water and into the shoreline, back in his sea monster form, just as Massimo comes out to see the damage. Alberto tries to explain to Massimo that it was an accident. Massimo doesn't say a word. When Alberto tries to explain again, Massimo angrily looks at Alberto with a frustrated grunt. Alberto's ears droop, feeling sadness that all of his attempts to impress Massimo were in vain. Upset, Alberto walks away to go pack up his things and leave. Alberto is dried off as he walks up an alleyway with a suitcase in his hands. Alberto struggles to carry the suitcase as we walk on, only for Massimo to notice what he's doing, asking him promptly. Alberto turns around. Alberto sighs and says that he quit, admitting that he's not good at his job and isn't good at being Massimo's employee. Massimo denies this. He tries to persuade Alberto to come back by trying to grab his suitcase, but Alberto, still frustrated, snaps back at Massimo, asking him why he cares so much. Alberto goes even further to say that he probably doesn't like him, which is the reason he doesn't talk to him. Alberto begins walking away further as Massimo calls his name. Massimo then catches up to Alberto, putting his hand on Alberto's shoulder. Alberto tells him to let him go, but he accidentally calls him Dad. Alberto's eyes open wide and so do Massimo's. Alberto, apparently surprised by what he said, drops the suitcase he was holding. Alberto ducks down to pick it up. Massimo also ducks down to Alberto's level and puts the suitcase back down on the ground. Wanting to tell him something, Massimo reveals that he once made his father so angry that he punched a hole into a brick wall. Alberto is surprised. He asks if it was for real, with Massimo nodding. Alberto insists for him to continue, wanting to hear more. Alberto asks what happened next, with Massimo answering that they made up by patching it up together. Massimo then gestures with his hand to Alberto to come back. Instead, Alberto hugs Massimo. Massimo is taken aback for a moment, but after a little pause, Massimo also embraces Alberto. The next day, Massimo and Alberto begin rebuilding the boat. Massimo also teaches Alberto how to properly use a hammer, chuckling at Alberto's surprise. Alberto and Massimo share stories with each other. Alberto asks Massimo to tell him everything as they fix their boat. In 2024, Luca and Alberto made their first theme park appearance at the Disneyland Resort during Pixar Fest, which began on April 26. They had a meet and greet spot in the Fantasyland Theater at Disneyland Park where the Pixar Pals Playtime Party took place at the time. They also made an appearance on the Pixar Parade Better Together, a Pixar Pals celebration. along with Julia at Disney California Adventure. On August 5, 2024, after Pixar Fest ended, Luca and Alberto make regular appearances at Pixar Pier in California Adventure. On May 19, 2025, Luca and Alberto have returned to their meet and greet spot at Fantasyland for Disneyland's 70th anniversary. First is to draw the body 2 legs, then wear an outfit for Alberto. Next is to draw 2 legs and then draw 2 arms for Alberto. Next is to draw the head, then make the face and attach 2 ears for Alberto. Finally, draw the hairstyle for Alberto. So the character Alberto Scorfano from the movie Luca has been completed. Now, if you like this video tutorial, please remember hit the like and subscribe button to receive the new notify. At the same time, please download the app and go to the website DisneyStore to shopping online, as well as Disney Plus to watch some movies and TV shows for free, used by many peoples of the world. Okay, we'll see you again tomorrow, so thanks for watching and goodbye everyone.